All right. Hi, everybody. We're just going to wait for everyone to sort of arrive in the Zoom room before we get started. Welcome. All right. Just wait another minute. I feel like we should have some music playing.
I would offer to hum, but I wouldn't wish on anyone.
Musical performance by the author. All right. Let's see if a few more people trickle in, but we might be ready to go. All right, let's just get started then. Hi, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's online live author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jean from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Qian Julie Wang, launching her new book, Beautiful Country. She'll be talking with Charles Yu, so you're in for an excellent time. Also, tonight's event is co-presented in partnership with Make the Road New York, an immigrant-led grassroots organization in New York State, building the power of immigrant and working class communities to achieve dignity and justice. So before we get started, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Qian Julie, Charles, Make the Road New York, and the whole team at Doubleday for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're really grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection around books. Okay, and before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping things to keep in mind. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can hear and see the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other through tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat, which is a great way to show your appreciation for the author and interact with fellow attendees. And if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author at the end of tonight's event, please post that question in the Q&A module, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. So if you post them in the chat, they may not get answered. And lastly, importantly, or not lastly, but importantly, tonight's featured book, Beautiful Country, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person in our stores from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. at our Fulton Street location and at our Flatbush Avenue location. And you can purchase Qian Julie's book, and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop the buy link in the chat, and I'll re-up it throughout tonight's event. 15% of online sales through the 19th will be donated to Make the Road New York, which builds the power of immigrant and working class communities to achieve dignity and justice. And also, Qian Julie is stopping by our store to sign copies of the book, so you can get a signed or even personalized book by request while supplies last. Make sure to indicate your signed copy request in order comments at checkout when ordering online by 11:59 p.m. tonight, or look for signed copies when you visit the store. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. And 15% of online sales, again, for the rest of the week of Beautiful Country, will be donated to Make the Road New York. Our interviewer tonight is Charles Yu. Charles is the author of 4 books, including Interior Chinatown, the winner of the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction, and the novel How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, Universe, which was a New York Times notable book and a Time Magazine Best Book of the Year. He received the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 Award and was nominated for 2 Writers Guild of America awards for his work on the HBO series Westworld. He has also written for shows on FX, AMC, and HBO. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and Wired, among other publications. And together with TaiwaneseAmerican.org, he established the Betty L.U. and Jin C.U. Writing Prizes in honor of his parents. Charles will be speaking with our featured author. Chan Julie Wang is a graduate of Yale Law School and Swarthmore College. Formerly a commercial litigator, she is now managing partner of Gottlieb and Wang LLP, a firm dedicated to advocating for education and civil rights. Her writing has appeared in major publications such as the New York Times and the Washington Post. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and their 2 rescue dogs, Salty and Peppers. Her new book, Beautiful Country, was hailed as a new classic and a critical addition to the literature on immigration. An incandescent and heart-rending memoir, Beautiful Country is an essential American story about a family fracturing under the weight of invisibility and a girl coming of age in the shadows who never stops seeking the light. And lastly, Jasmine Cruz from Make the Road New York is here to tell us a little more about their work before we hand it over to Chan, Julie, and Charles for their reading, conversation, and lastly, our audience Q&A. Thank you all so much, and please take it away, Jasmine.
Thank you so much. Before I jump into all the incredible work that Make the Road has been able to accomplish this year, especially during the pandemic, I'd like to share a few words about why stories like Chan Julie's are so important. When I read the synopsis, I immediately connected with it. Like Jan Julie, I arrived to New York when I was 6 years old. I arrived with my dad from a small dirt road village in Mexico to this big city on a March morning in 2001. And I remember being totally hypnotized by the snow. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. Riding the car from JFK to Brooklyn, I'd see the skyscrapers. And I remember telling my dad that it looks like they could really touch the skies. The shock of going from a village to a full city was both exciting and terrifying. And like Shan Julie, I was also undocumented, also trying to go by without being noticed. And in many ways, her story has been able to capture what I've lived through, what many of my colleagues have lived through, and what we see every day in our communities. Make the Road New York is a community-based organization with over 24,000 members, with offices in the hearts of Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Long Island, and Westchester. We provide essential and survival skills to community members every day. I joined Make the Road when I was a sophomore in high school, many years ago. And since then, I've been able to join departments that provide these services, right, to our community members. And now I work in development and I get to see how these services and programs are funded. When the pandemic hit New York last year, Make the Road New York, without missing a beat, just completely transformed. Our English classes and citizenship classes went remote. Our health workers and organizers started WhatsApp threads and intakes over the phone for any sort of relief for our people in the front lines. Our communities has been facing a lot of challenges in the past years, and the Trump administration really shined a light on the crisis we were living, but the pandemic seemed to magnify it 100 times over. Make the Road ramped up our services, and we were able to provide $4 million in immediate aid and expand our services. But as we know from decades of experience as an organization, services are essential to meet immediate needs, but we needed to organize for real dignity and justice. It was clear to us in March 2020 that we would need government scale solutions to really provide the support to our communities during the pandemic that we needed and that we would need to organize in order to win them. Our communities were in the front lines without unemployment benefits or any sort of relief. And through that struggle, fear, and necessity, the Excluded Workers Fund, was launched by our members who were excluded from the pandemic aid that many of us on this call were already receiving and benefiting from. And it ended when our members held a 23-day hunger strike, and they won, right? They won a $2.1 billion fund, which is the first in the nation, and it is now being distributed to undocumented New Yorkers right now. We won this incredible benefit, but we know the fight is not over. some of our struggles that we face daily would be solved or would begin being solved with a pathway into citizenship. And right now, the federal government has an opportunity to pass a pathway to citizenship for DACA holders, for TPS recipients, field workers, and many essential workers. This all possible through a federal budget process. You'll be hearing about it in the news, and we'll be fighting tooth and nail to make this a reality, right? This weekend, we are mobilizing buses from New York City to DC to really bring the fight to the doorstep at the nation's capital and say, we're here to stay. To follow us in this fight and in many other fights, please feel free to follow us on our social media channels at Make the Road New York. Again, thank you so much, Sean Julie, and to Greenlight Bookstore for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful event. If you have any questions about our work, please feel free, again, to follow us at Make the Road New York. And I'll pass it over to Sean Julie for a small reading of this long-awaited and beautiful book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. And greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. I just want to reiterate how very important Make the Road New York's work has been, particularly in the pandemic, but in the recent years. And Jasmine did a great job of it. She could not possibly summarize everything that the organization has done, the vital work that it has helped communities across the country and across the city. So please consider donating to Make the Road or looking them up and supporting them in their advocacy and activism. I will open now with a very short reading, and I think it might pick up a little bit on the lights that Jasmine mentioned, which I also talk about on my cab ride from JFK to Brooklyn. It's eerie how similar our stories are. So if you have the book with you, it's chapter 9, Lights, and starts on page 104. When we emerged from underground, I was shocked to see that the sun had set. But it took me a second to notice under the lights all around us. We walked a few blocks in throngs of people so thick, it felt like we were back in Beijing. Then Mama led me to the base of the largest, brightest tree I had ever seen. The tree was surrounded by buildings, perfectly framed as I looked up at it against the night sky. Like the one in class, this tree wore decorations, balls, and figures of all kinds. Some were lit from within like Halloween decorations, while others had glitter, and still others shone with their bright colors alone. I went up to one, a gold ball that was so shiny and large that I saw my own face in it. In the reflection, my eyes shone back at me a sparkle that I would carry in my body for the rest of the night. Mama had still more to show me, so she walked me onto the wide streets that had signs telling us that we were on 5th Avenue. It was the cleanest and fanciest street I'd ever seen in Megua. The storefronts were huge and tall with men dressed in suits at the doors. Some of them were white, some black, but none Chinese. We stopped in the middle of a crowd of passersby, admiring the front of a store that had strings of lights adorning its face. With a twinkle here and a flash there, the lights announced that a show was about to begin. I held my breath and waited, gripping Mama's hand. Out of the corner of my eyes, I caught her smiling as the music began and filled the street. Slowly at first, and then all of a sudden, more lights appeared, one light bulb giving birth to another, then another, before spreading across the entire building, each bulb dancing to the beat of the music. And though we'd never heard the melody before, soon Mama and I began moving with the swaying crowd, shaking gently to the beat, joy vibrating through us. The whole world was dancing, and so were we. We exchanged another smile, and I marveled how, in all the stories of the gold-paved Megua and the dangerous Megua, no one in China knew about the lights of America, about how they were so delightful that they could stop us in the middle of the street, in the middle of our lives and our worries, in the middle of strangers living stranger lives, all just to fill us with music and hope. Tracing it all back, I know now that it was the moment I first became enamored with the idea of America. It was the first time I saw the beauty and glamour of the country and really of New York City, though at that point, the two were one and the same to me. The lights and the joy among the crowd that night showed me all that the city was and had to offer. a completely different face of America than the one we had come to know. Finally, the beautiful country's name made sense.
That's beautiful. Hi, Julie. It's nice to meet you.
So good to be here with you.
Congratulations on the publication of this book. It's really beautiful. I won't gush too much and make 80 people listen to that, but I think that passage captures a lot about what I found so moving and important about this book, which is that you show there's beauty and wonder and through the eyes of young Chen Julie, of at that time I guess just Chen, and and in this new Meiguo, in its new beautiful country. And yet the book is also filled with so much pain and so much struggle, and the way you mix all of those things, I just and you made me cry, and it's it also making me cry involving Bette Midler is I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but when you get to the Bette Midler part, you probably will cry. It's also a good time to just plug, if you haven't bought the book already, buy it at Greenlight. That'd be a good place to buy the book. And if you've already bought it, buy another one and give it as a gift. But yeah, I would just love, I'll stop talking for a second. How did you write this book? When did you first get the idea, and how long did it take you? All of that stuff, I guess.
Thank you, Charles, for the very kind words. I promised before we started that I would not fangirl too much over your work. So I will also keep that to a minimum, but to hear that I made you cry is the highest praise, and I apologize for making you cry over Bette Midler. I started thinking about writing this book in 2016. In May 2016, I became a citizen 22 years after I first came to this country, which is still sooner than a lot of undocumented immigrants get to become citizen. And that, of course, was going into the 2016 election with all of its political and national rhetoric. And that national rhetoric about undocumented immigrants wasn't new. It just, I feel, kicked up a notch, given who the candidate was and his particular beliefs. But watching those debates, I felt something monumentally shift within me. I realized that for the first time, I was not keeping things a secret because I had to. I was keeping my past a secret because I chose to, and I chose to associate shame and fear with my childhood and my history. And it was that realization that made me realize that I had a newfound privilege, power, and responsibility to speak up and share my story. But again, at that point, I had gone 22 years without talking about it. My parents really did not enjoy talking about it. Anyone with Asian or Chinese parents will know that we do not like to air our dirty laundry, even within the house. And again, we're not a monolith, but I don't know if something in Chinese culture that really skews against that. So I went into therapy for the first time and revisited all of the memories I had not even let myself think about. I pretty much had locked them in the basement of my brain, in the basement of my heart. And once I kind of cracked the door open a little bit, it was like an avalanche. There was no going back. And I saw anew for the first time how much it had weighed on me all of those years, and started writing. But of course, the act of writing while being a lawyer, I'm sure you know, Charles, is an endeavor for people who are not sound of mind. I think I was not getting much sleep at all. I was working 80 hours a week trying to make partner, and I had this book that I felt so guilty for not writing all the time. So I created a rule for myself that whenever I was on the subway platform or on the subway train in my commute to work, because of the limited reception, because I could not handle client calls, that was when I would be writing the book. And I was writing it in my notes app, and my rule was not to use the delete button once, I'm such an over editor, and I really wanted whatever came out to be raw and honest and visceral. And I think that was the only way to accomplish it. So, and even with that rule, I took like at one point a full year off writing this book because I just didn't have enough time in the day. And I was also emotionally exhausted from crying on the subway on my way to work writing this. But in late September 2019, I still felt like I had to finish it. I'm like, it's been 2 years since I've started writing this. I still haven't finished. So I gave myself a deadline of December 31st, 2019, and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And December 30th, 2019, I finished a book. I looked at my phone and I said, I think that's it. I can't think of anything else. And that was the first day I emailed everything to myself and collated it into a Word document and realized it was 300 pages.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm still running through several points in my mind that I mean, one thing that just sticks out is to all the lawyers out there, like, I don't have enough time in the day. Qian Julie wrote this on the subway on the Notes app, so there's enough time. Also, you know, making all of us feel bad about our time management skills.
Sorry.
No, it's incredible, and it shows the passion. One thing that, you know, you were talking about in terms of therapy, it sort of answers, I think, one question I had, which is you have this incredibly detailed, nuanced recall of just a vivid emotional state for, you know, young childhood. And was that helpful in recovering that? Like anyone who knows me can tell you I have a terrible memory, so I like literally don't remember how I felt yesterday, you know, but it adds to the texture of the book. I mean, this is just so people know, it feels novelistic, you know. And I read somewhere, I think that you, like, maybe it's in the book, you talk about how maybe initially the intention was to write a fictionalized version of this, but I think you essentially did. I mean, it's incredible how, yeah, I mean, can you talk at all about what that was like to access that memory on that level?
Yeah, so I did attempt a fictionalized version that was, I think, in the very beginning of the book. I mentioned that. I tried it in college and I just was not healed enough to write any of it authentically. When I went back into therapy, one exercise that was really empowering and liberating that my therapist had me do, and I have more than one therapist, I'm not ashamed, was to go back in my memories and reparent little Qian. So be the adult in the background and see her in the foreground and be that parent for her, so she was able to feel everything that she could not afford to feel in that moment. And part of that exercise, of course, was looking at what actually happened. And thankfully, I was deeply inspired by Harriet the Spy. I went through a phase of documenting every mundane detail around me in hopes of solving some major mystery. No major mystery ever evolved, but that diary and those entries really helped me reconstruct what was going on for that little girl. For instance, there's one entry that raves for 3 pages about how someone in my class gets to eat a strawberry shortcake ice cream bar every day after school. And of course, it's written in an incredibly childish voice. And I had to be the parent looking at that and trying to understand, why was I so fixated on that ice cream bar? Why was I watching this girl? Of course, I was incredibly hungry at all hours of the day, and this was how it manifested. So it was very painful, very scary to go back and look at the entries and look at the photos, the ones that I do have access to still. But thankfully, I was privileged enough to be able to afford a mental health professional who was there with me and who could guide me through all of that. And I have to say the process was transformative. Not only in terms of my relationship to myself, I was also able to go back and allow little Qian to feel what she was feeling at the moment, but also see what my parents were going through adult eyes and feel what they felt as young 30-some year olds who just came to a different continent and was just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And so it has transformed my relationship to the past, and most vitally, and the thing I'm most grateful for is that it's transformed my relationship to my parents.
Wow. Yeah, a line that sticks out. I think you're right. America was a living lesson in hunger, which is, a startling line, and in the context of a little kid. I'm jumping around a little bit, but since you talked about food. I mean, there's I guess a chapter or a part of the book that talks about how your school was giving out free meals. I don't want to spoil the story, but I just thought it's such a. Also don't want to cry on Zoom. So maybe you should tell this story, because I think it's just a great illustration of the kind of story you tell in this book.
Yeah. In China, I never knew hunger. I was just another fairly privileged kid who was surrounded by food and family and love at all times. And it's funny because when I look back on photos of me in China, I was always holding something, like a piece of meat, a candied apple. I was always eating. And in the US was the first time that when I said I was hungry, my mother reacted completely differently. She looked incredibly sad, and then she said, "Oh, that just shows you that you're getting stronger. That's a good sign. You should just, feel it and lean into it." And I picked up, as I think a lot of children learn to pick up the emotional energy of their parents. And I realized that my saying I was hungry was painful for my mother. So I started hiding it. And one of the ways that I wanted to help out, because we were very strapped for cash, we had $20 a week for food, was that I told her I got a free breakfast at school, and then I got a free lunch that was amply filling at school. I did get both meals were available to me, but because I lived in Brooklyn and my school was in Manhattan, and I worked at a sweatshop until late and other places, I was never quite able to get to school on time for that early breakfast. And none of the meals, if I ever got them, was filling. I was immediately hungry right away. And it was just a new sensation to me. And those of us who have been fortunate not to be hungry, as I was until age 7, like, you just don't know what is going on in your body, breaking out into cold sweats, everything's shaky, and all you can think about is just gnawing in your stomach. So it was the one thing that I felt that I could take the burden off my parents. And up until, I would say, like 3-4 years ago, my mother didn't know that I had skipped breakfast every single day of elementary school. And it absolutely broke her heart when she found out. But I didn't know how to do it any other way.
Oh. Thank you for sharing that. I am searching for a good segue into something because I'm like, there's so many things I would like to talk about. My initial plan before I took a detour right away was to somewhat go chronologically in terms of your journey. I think you start by describing some of your relatives, your family, your Lao and your parents, and and other people in your family, and how also some of your family was speaking out against the government. And I guess that sort of sets the stage for coming to Make Wool. So if you wouldn't mind starting there and talking about the background, I guess, of your parents, and I'd love to hear that, if that's okay.
Sure. My parents' earliest memories were of the Cultural Revolution. And for those not familiar with Chinese history, this is a 10-year period from 1966 to 1976, where Chairman Mao invited incredible upheaval, including of people to revolt against intellectuals and writers, professors, teachers, landlords, and pretty much, just aggregate, from my perspective, aggregate his power, because when people are reporting on their neighbors and their teachers, They are less focused on uniting against the government. So my father's very first memory, which I open the book with, is of two scholars hanging dead from a tree. And at their feet is written in blood a Chinese character for the word wrongly accused. And then it goes forward in time to when my father is 7 years old and his second oldest brother writes a paper criticizing Chairman Mao for causing all of this bloodshed. And I should know that to this day, it's unclear how many people died during those 10 years. Historians estimate anywhere from 500,000 to 6 million. We just don't know because the government has been very good at obscuring the records. So my uncle wrote a piece saying, calling upon his fellow teens who were the Red Guards, who really carried out a lot of Chairman Mao's orders, calling upon those Red Guards to think critically about what they were doing and who it was benefiting. And it was quickly determined that it was my uncle, then 18, who wrote the piece. He got dragged off into prison, tortured and starved. And my father, then just starting grade school, grew up with this mark of dissident and traitor his entire life. He saw his parents being dragged out to the town square and getting beaten. Those were his earliest memories. His home being ransacked, his older sisters crying, screaming. So it is impossible to put into words how tragic and terrifying my father's childhood was and how much strength it took him to get out unscathed and become an English professor. But when he did become an English literature professor in China, he quickly found that he could not teach the social criticism that he so much loved in Dickens and Mark Twain. And from there, it was decided that he would come to the US, where he hoped that there would be more freedom to be open about one's views and what the government was doing.
Thank you. And so you arrive and you're very young, and you had ideas about what the beautiful country would be like. Did you? And I guess, what was it like? If you could, share with us sort of what those first few days, months, entering school, for instance. Like, a lot of the book talks about teachers you had and experiences you had. Yeah, if you could share some of that.
Back then in the 90s in China, there were two very polarized views of America and what it was. And I mentioned a little bit in the reading that I just recounted, but one was where, America is perfect. All the roads are paved with gold. You can take gold from trees. Like, everyone is super well off and nobody's hungry. And in the other image, it's everybody is hungry. Everyone's fighting for food. And my mother and I didn't quite know what to expect, except that my father, who had left 2 years prior, had relayed to us a little bit, but certainly not the full scope of what he had gone through. And we had some sense that it was closer to the latter photo of America. And when I got off, as Jasmine got off the plane, as Jasmine mentioned, I was so struck by the lights. There were lights everywhere. There were giant buildings. I didn't think I had ever seen buildings that big or majestic. And I was hopeful. I was like, this looks like the gold paved Meiguo. Like, for sure, we have landed at the right place. But juxtaposed against that was my father and how skinny he had gotten in just a span of 2 years, how tired he looked, how worn his clothing was. And I quickly learned that it was indeed closer to that latter image of America that we would be consigned to. And my earliest memories of America are the smell of cheese everywhere. That's very unusual, maybe more usual now in Asia, but back then in China, there was not really the smell of dairy. So that followed me everywhere. The use of slurs against me and my family was very common. We lived in an area of Brooklyn where there were not many Asians. And it was very quickly instilled in me that we were not welcome and that people did not want us around. So it quickly became a nightmare, and I so longed for China. I kept waiting for the time my parents said, okay, time to go back, because as quickly as things changed, I had hoped things would be restored. And we had no idea of how long we would be staying, whether it would be years or months or weeks was my hope. But until then, I just had to muddle through. And therein lies, I think, the resilience of children. They take every day as it comes, and whatever is before them, they try to just handle it. So going to school and not understanding a word of English, as I say in the book, it felt like I was just walking through a fog and not understanding a thing. I felt like there was cotton in my ears. And then being sent to a classroom for children with disabilities and being left alone was actually both a gift and a curse, I suppose. The gift being that I had books, and I loved reading before I left China, but they never played the role that they started to play in my time in America. The books became my friends. The books became my la la lao ye, ye nai nai. Like, they were my family. And it was there, I think, that I found that storytelling can really save you. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, the stories we tell about the world, became my salvation through that.
Yeah, that's it's such an incredible, image of you in that room, just finding books, and through that also basically teaching yourself English, it sounds like, right? Or at least vastly increasing your proficiency through reading, which was so beautiful. You mentioned also, well, I guess against that backdrop of the community and feeling very unwelcome, you did find points of, in small ways, points of community, I guess, with either other families or and maybe not always friendly, but people that you, in whatever way, I guess the first building blocks of a life here, it felt like. And also I think there's a lot of description in the book of the space that your family lived in those first few years. And if I thought if you could talk a little bit about what that was like and describe the layout, I won't do it justice. So I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Sure. We were in one room. If I reached out my arm like that, I could touch my parents' bed from my bed. We did everything in that one room. We shared the kitchen with, I'm going to say 4 or 5 other families, maybe 6 at a time, shared the bathroom with those same families. And I think it was a blessing in that I figured everyone else lived like that. Everyone else lived like that in America, and everyone lived the privileged life I lived in China, was how my childhood mind worked. And so I didn't feel as incredibly deprived as I would have if I had known how others' conditions had been. I, of course, watched TV. We found a little TV in the sidewalk trash and brought it home. And I watched all sorts of shows that showed me, how America was depicted in the media. But I figured first that was just for white people. And secondly, that's just TV. They make everything look great. And they don't want to film everything in one room because there's no room to put the cameras in there. And 3rd grade especially was when I think really felt a sense of home, because I had a teacher whom I loved and who saw me. And looking back, it's incredible that she was in charge of 35 kids in one classroom, and she was probably fresh out of college, but she made me feel like I was the only student in her class, as I'm sure she did for all of us. She really saw my gifts and my stressors. And when I was sad, she would pull me aside. She was the first one to give me a book, Charlotte's Web, which I have to this day. And it cannot be underestimated or understated how very important teachers are, especially in immigrant communities and low-income communities. They are the front line of defense. Schools are the first place that any immigrant gets public resources, because especially for undocumented people, we're too scared to go anywhere else. And Ms. Pong gave me that. She gave me this anchor of, oh, here's an adult who sees me. My parents are too stressed to talk to me, but she cares. And if I can impress her and build something with her, then I have something in America. And the other was my friend Elaine, who was just so loving and kind and made me feel like, oh, I have a sense of family here. And I'm still friends with Elaine. So it's just, yeah, it's those little kind of lifelines that were enough. And, in that vacuum, as I say, of the anxiety of undocumented life, there are these lifelines and bright rays of hope that kind of descended on me and kept me going from day to day. And that's, of course, not accounting for my beloved books, including the Babysitters Club, which, I lived in that world and breathed that world. And it felt to me like just the escape I needed from my everyday.
Yeah. I keep trying not to talk about heavy things, but I mean, the reality is there's a lot heavy in the book. I mean, I shouldn't pedal it. And it was something you said I wanted to make sure we touched on. We're a few minutes from turning to audience Q&A, which I'm looking forward to. We've already got some in there, but I did want to ask, another feature of your life here, your first years, was a constant I guess fear of the authorities, that you use the opinion to describe the phrase, I was born here, I've always been in America. And it's kind of a refrain throughout the book. I wondered if you could just talk about what that felt like. I mean, because I just feel like it's such an important part of the impulse of the book that you talked about at the beginning, to share your story of being undocumented. So
yeah, I think it's this is why I opened with my father's story. I saw that someone asked why I said my story starts decades before I was born. And it's a truism, I think, in any family, that until you heal the trauma that has been passed down to you, you will continue passing it down. And this is not a statement against my father. He did the very best he could, and I'm absolutely convinced of that. But he grew up with this fear of authorities, fear of government, this feeling like he was constantly on the run. And when we came to America, that messaging was immediately passed down to me. I remember my parents saying we didn't have documents, and I had no idea what that meant. I wasn't even aware that we had documents in China. Like, what documents are you talking about? But it was immediately encoded in my system, my brain, all of my being, that we were not allowed here. We clearly weren't wanted here based on how we were treated on the street. And I was to hide that I had ever immigrated. And even from my 7-year-old mind, I was like, well, I can't speak a word of this language. I don't know how I'm going to convince people that I've been here my whole life, but okay, people don't want to hear that. So it became this lie that grew within me. And I would say I grew around it and carried it around with me. And it's incredible, the secrets that you're told to keep in your childhood. I think all of us have them, that we inherently build a sense of shame around them. And then that sense of shame become a sense of who we are. And I did not realize the power of that until I was nearly 30, really, that my whole life I had been told, essentially, I was not to be honest about who I was, and therefore that who I was a bad thing, an illegal thing, a shameful thing. And as I say later in the book, that made me become a habitual liar in my childhood, because if I could lie about this, then it's easier to lie about something else. But also, if I lied about something that was less monumental, then maybe it takes the shame away from this big thing that I am carrying around all my life. And this whole idea of secrecy is something that I think is central to the way I have told my story, because my dad, again, felt this burden of this label on him, and then the need to hide constantly, both in China and America, became the shadow that followed me and my entire family.
Thank you for illuminating that connection. I think that's such a, I don't think I fully grasped it until you started to explain that. I want to talk about all of it. I also have a green light is graciously saying I can have a couple more minutes to do my questions before I lose the chance. So I want to talk about your mom, because the relationship is so it's a huge part of the book, of course. and I want to talk about the fact that you're still managing your a partner at a law firm. But first, can we just talk about your cat? Because I think that would also be important. Can you tell us about your cat and like what was that like? Because I feel like we've talked about so many things, and it just makes it seem like you weren't a kid, but you were a kid, and you were going through all of these things. And the book is just through your, I guess, 7, 8, 9-year-old eyes, right? Something like that.
I would love to talk about Marilyn. I don't want to offer any spoilers to anybody, so
Okay.
I will be very, very cautious.
Okay.
I really just wanted to be a normal American kid, as defined through the Babysitters Club, Puzzle Place, Sweet Valley High. And it seemed that a central feature of that was having a pet. Many characters in those books had a dog, which was my ideal, but could not afford a dog, could not take care of a dog. We finally had someone gift us a cat who my parents were pretty sure was a stray off the street. I really did not care. For me, Marilyn wasn't just a symbol of my belonging or my being, normal, whatever that means. It was also that I had lost so much in that plane flight from China to the United States that I wanted a sense of family. I wanted someone who was there with me all the time, who I could call a friend and a sibling and a family member. And Marilyn became all of those things for me: belonging, love, family, connection. I doted on her. I followed her everywhere. And anyone who's had a cat knows that that is usually not welcome behavior. She found me, I think, incredibly annoying. And I would force her into my lap and she would jump off. I even wrote a poem about her that I found in my diary called My Kitty in the Circle of My Arms, about how I kept her in the circle of my arms because if I let go, she would run away. So she was the reason that I went home every day after school, that I had this friend at home and could pretend that I was, a babysitter club member who had her own pet. And I loved her. And I felt that if I could keep her at home and keep her alive and keep her healthy, that maybe we weren't doing so bad and we would have hope. The addition of Marilyn made me feel like our family maybe had a trajectory of doing a little bit better. Of course, it was a lot of siphoned food that I fed her, sometimes from our roommates' belongings in the fridge. And my parents were not enthralled with the idea of caring for yet another living being, given all the demands that they were under.
Right.
So I guess I'll end with that because I really don't want to offer any spoilers.
No, you're right. I didn't think about that. Yes, the Arc of Marilyn in the book is important. So it's a good teaser. And yes, I think before I give it back to Jean, I think I'd love to just ask, there's one, I don't want to put you on the spot, but there's a line in the book about your mom. And I don't know if it's just based on that saying which one it would be, but there's just a line about being beautiful that it is incredible. It's an incredible line. And I feel like in some ways it encapsulates so much of just what she represented in your life. If you could just talk about her.
Yeah, I wish for every child a strong mother, and I was fortunate. That was my biggest blessing in life, that I had a strong, wise mother. It breaks my heart to say this, but she does not see herself that way. She often says that she is not smart. She's done nothing. The only thing she's done in her life was to raise as she says, brilliant daughter. But I mean, I would not be half what I was without my mom. And she always instilled, I'm like tearing up, I'm sorry. She always instilled in me that it was what was inside that mattered. And to listen to my gut, from early on in our time in America, she didn't have many people to lean on. So she started asking me questions about what she should do. And whether child psychologists say that that's a good thing or not is beside the point. It's that she had no resources, and we became a unit. We became this unbreakable unit. And by her looking to me, it gave me a sense of agency and salvation. Like if my mother was looking to me and truly believed that I was the one who would get out of the situation and told me every single day that what we were going through, the hunger, the poverty, the hopelessness, every single day she said, this is temporary. One day you are going to have everything. Whatever you see on TV, the majestic palaces, you are going to have that. And that wisdom, that ability to give hope in the darkest times is what I tried to convey in this book. This book would not be what it is without her. These moments of levity and joy and hope that you mentioned, Charles, are me trying to impart to the reader what she gave to me. So yeah, without my mother, I would be nothing. So thank you for asking that.
Thanks for sharing that. Well, I don't know that I can recover from that, first of all, so I will, Jean, please come back on screen and save me. Or else I can just ask more questions. There are plenty more. Okay.
No, that was such an, I'm sure this conversation could go on for hours and hours. So there's so much to talk about. There are a couple of great questions in the Q&A module. If anybody has more, you can feel free to type them in there. Some of them were answered in the course of your guys' conversation, but Linda Beck asks, when you were writing your first draft, Chanjuli, were you retelling yourself the story, or did you have someone in mind you wanted to tell it to?
So the judge who appears at the end of the book is a central figure in helping me get this book down, because she was one of the first people I talked about writing this book. And I was like, I just can't, when I think about people reading this book, I just can't get a single word out. I just get paralyzed because there's so much, and I don't want my parents to be afraid of ICE coming after them. There was just so much going on. And what she said was, look, it never has to be published. Nobody ever has to see it, but wouldn't you like it if you had something akin to this book that you're talking about, of your great-grandma, of your grandma or great-grandma or great-great-grandma. You may never meet this person, but maybe one day they open up a file or a capsule and they see this document, and wouldn't they like to know where they came from? And that was the guiding light for me in that entire process of writing the first draft. If I thought of anyone who is alive today reading this, I would not have gone through with it. I never would have written down a single word. But with that idea of leaving that story so that someone else down the line knew really where their family came from and how strong, how resilient the blood is in their body, that it may give hope to them, whatever the situation they find themselves. That was what anchored me. So as I was writing on my phone, I just pretended I was texting someone, a descendant who I would never meet.
Wow, that's really powerful. And I guess sort of a good question to bounce off of that one, Jessica asks, at what point in your writing process did you begin pitching this book for publishing? And I also want to, if I can, compact my own question onto that, which is, when did everything that you were writing, this outpouring, start coalescing definitely as a book and start, growing wings, as it were?
When I first started writing, I had zero hope of finishing a whole book. I'd never done it before. I really didn't think I was capable of it. So I started writing in the middle of the book, whatever came to me, the memories that I was processing in therapy session that week was the one. So the first chapter that I ever wrote was Shopping Day, which is pretty far into the book. And it wasn't until I had like maybe 6 chapters or so that I was like, oh, I'm stringing something together that might actually form a real piece of writing. So I created a notes document listing all the memories that I wanted to make sure I covered. And it's literally a bullet list of Marilyn, Tamagotchi, shopping, Babysitter's Club, just things. So I made sure I covered all of the memories as I went through my diary or went through therapy sessions. And from there, every morning on my commute, I would look at the list. I would either continue writing what I was writing the previous day, or if I was done with that, I would look at the list and just start a new, what would become a chapter down the line. So I finished writing December 30th, 2019. As I said, I took a week off work to edit the draft, the first draft, because there were things that I wanted to be continuous and seamless, like as I learned English, the pinyin would seep out and there would be more American speak. And I wanted the voice to be, very clearly 7-year-old, 8-year-old. And as she matures, the voice matures. So that took quite a bit of work on the back end. And then I looked at the document and I said, if I don't submit this now, I'm going to lose my nerve. I just will never do it. So I typed into Google literary agent or publishing agent, I can't remember, and just cold emailed 60 to 100 people, not really even stopping to look what works they represented, because that was going to freak me out. If they represented Charles Yu or someone big, I would have been like, oh, this person. So I just shot off a bunch of emails. But I found my agent Adriana through a former teacher at Catapult, with whom I took one class, and she said, whatever you need, I'm here for you. So Adriana and I met in February. Then the pandemic happened, and I finally had time off from traveling. I was flying across the country for work all the time, and things had slowed down a little bit during the pandemic. That gave me a chance to polish the manuscript a bit more. And we went on submission the week that the George Floyd video came to surface. So it was an insane time in our country, in the world. And I'm not sure, looking back, how we managed to do it all, despite all the major, very important issues that were going on. But I have to say that timing actually helped me, because I was distracted and focused on protests and activism. And so it was probably easier for me with everything that was going on, for it to be going on in the world, because I just wasn't thinking about it, to be honest, all that much.
Wow, what a potent timeline. I have a question from Susie, who asks if there are other Asian American writers who have influenced you, such as Maxine Hong Kingston or Jean Kwok.
Absolutely. And I said to Charles earlier that I loved his writing, and I think I've written a note sometime earlier saying how much he inspired me with just the humor he puts into serious situations and important messages. Jean Kwok, for sure, the way that she has represented Chinatown in her writings. Maxine Hong Kingston, I had studied in college. It was probably the first memoir I had studied, and I realized, oh, you can do nonfiction in a very artistic and beautiful manner. And that is the energy with which I have written my book. And also Kathy Park Hong, I discovered her book Minor Feelings in the pandemic when I was feeling very at loss and worried about my parents being out in public, scared myself of going out in public. And her story spoke so many truths that I had kept buried and not really found the voice to express. And reading her book over and over again while editing my book helped me find the confidence to channel that voice and that honesty.
Definitely. And we'll just answer one more question before we wrap up tonight. And this question is from Julie. She opens with some praise. I just finished the book and it was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for so bravely sharing your story. Would you please share how your parents are now and what your relationship is with them?
My parents are, well, they're still together. I have gone through that typical young adult phase of being very angry at them, not talking to them. I've been through all of it. I did not give them the book until September 7th. My mother was very anxious. She's like, can I read it now? Can I read it now? I just don't understand why I can't read it. And I pretty much lied and said I didn't have access to my own book. That Doubleday had all of it. And my dad was like, oh, that makes sense. The books aren't published, so they haven't been printed yet. So she doesn't have a copy. No sense of the fact that it was originally on my computer and has always been. I gave it to them on September 7th. They texted me that night saying that they could not put it down, which was terrifying to me. I just, there's so much in there about them and also about stuff that I went through that I never shared with them that I always wanted to protect them from. And my heart just broke thinking about them reading everything and reopening their wounds. And even when I gave them a book, they said, I don't know if I can bear to revisit those years, but they did because the book was right there. My dad said, I have to keep putting the book down because my vision keeps blurring from my tears, but I can't help but pick it up again every time, because with each page, I feel that I'm healing. And I mean, of all things I wished in the world for this book, like publishing it widely was not even anywhere near to the, like, you know, the craziest dream I had was for it to heal my parents and to heal other children and parents and other immigrants and Asian Americans out there. And that it could do that for my father, knowing what he has been through, was, I just didn't think it would ever happen. And so once I got that message, and then he said, I'm so proud of you, and all of these things that can sometimes be very hard for Chinese fathers to express, I said that was it. I mean, I don't even care. Everything else is just gravy at this point. I'm just so grateful. And so I'm newly hopeful that this book has brought all three of us to a new phase of our lives where we can finally heal this chapter and move forward together.
I teared up. I just teared up as well.
We've
And
been crying this whole time, so.
Rightfully so. This has been such a powerful reading and discussion. Thank you both so much for that fantastic conversation. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Don't forget to buy your copy of Beautiful Country in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. Yeah, it feels almost crass to, to plug the book itself, but you've got to read it.
Yeah, read it.
I just want to say that I went in earlier last week to sign books and personalized orders with some of the very sweet and moving messages that you have asked me to put in dedications. That was my favorite part of the book coming out, was writing these personal messages to readers at Greenlight. So please place your order by midnight Eastern time so I can go. I'm going in tomorrow and I will be handwriting all of these messages, whatever you want me to write, or I can come up with something, a limerick, my kitty in the circle of my arms, whatever you want in that book, I will put it in there. Thank you so much to Greenlight for organizing this event, for partnering with Make the Road and making sure that we get proceeds to that very important organization. And thank you, Charles, for making time to read my book and spending this night with us.
No, thanks for writing it. Thank you. I'm lucky to be here. Thank you all. Thanks, Jean.
Thank you all so much. Right. Good night.
Take care.
Good
Bye,
night.
everyone. Thanks, everyone.